Welcome back to Real-ationship Goals, a podcast all about exploring the realities and complexities of healthy relationships. Real-ationship Goals is a project of the Prevention and Education team at the Advocacy Center for Crime Victims and Children in Waco, Texas. If you or someone you know has experienced sexual violence or harassment and is seeking support services or needs more information, links to resources and our hotline number can be found in the description. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of their organizations or affiliates. All right. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Real-ationship Goals, this time including introductions. I'm Kyla, I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Mónica, I use they, she pronouns.
I'm Elsie, I use she, her pronouns.
Awesome. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, today we are doing another one of our special topics episode, and I believe December, correct me if I'm wrong, is it
Man.
Disability Justice Month, right? Is that it?
No, I forgot what day it was. Oh my gosh. But it was International Day of People with Disabilities.
Yes.
My goodness, what day was it? It was last week.
Was it Friday?
No,
No,
I
it was
almost
the 5th.
So Thursday.
Yeah.
We posted it.
Oh, yes, okay.
I'm pretty sure it was the 5th.
Go ahead,
We
I'm
did
so
make a
sorry.
post about it. No, it's okay. At some point last week, it was recently National Day. Is national or international? International.
December 3rd.
December 3rd. There we go. It was a day honoring folks internationally with disabilities. So in honor of that, we wanted to take the opportunity to use our podcast platform to also not only draw attention to, but also just acknowledge and hold space for a lot of really awesome activists and just movements that have greatly impacted not only folks with disabilities, but the entire world and in our entire country, and have just impacted and made our lives better. So we just want to take some time to learn and share today. So I'll go ahead and kick us off with that, get us started, get the ball rolling. So I have a little bit of info on activist, comedian, actress, journalist Stella Young. So Stella was born with osteogenesis imperfecta in 1982 in Stawell, Victoria. Osteogenesis imperfecta, or OI, is like more commonly known as brittle bone disease. That's kind of what people know about it. That's a genetic disorder that results in bones that break extremely easily. Yeah, so she utilized a wheelchair for most of her life. And this was super cool. I don't have a lot of detail on it, but I thought it was too cool to not include. But at the age of 14, she audited the accessibility of the Main Street businesses of her hometown, which I had not heard anywhere. 14, which I had never, like, I've read her website before, I've watched TED Talks, like I've read a decent amount by her, but that's the first I'd ever seen like of that, and I just thought that was so cool. She attended Deakin University and earned a bachelor's in journalism and public relations and a graduate diploma in education from the University of Melbourne. And if most of those places don't sound familiar, that is because they are located in Australia.
Yeah, I guessed it right in my head.
But following her graduation, she worked for a little while as a secondary school teacher, which I think is like high school. I was like, I think secondary school is high school. She worked as an educator in public programs at the Melbourne Museum and hosted 8 seasons of a show called No Limits, which was a disability culture program on like a community TV station, I think Channel 31. She also served as the editor for the Australian Broadcasting Company, or ABC, their online magazine called Ramp Up. She published an editorial in July 2012 focused on deconstructing society's habit of using people with disabilities as quote unquote inspiration porn, which is a phrase that's more widely known now, but that's a phrase that she actually directly came up with, that she coined. Inspiration porn is the idea that disabled people can do things quote unquote in spite of their disability and are used as inspiration for non-disabled people rather than being content that truly just uplifts and acknowledges the achievements of people with disabilities. She gave an incredible TEDx Sydney talk, one of my favorites, on the subject titled "I'm Not Your Inspiration. Thank you very much." I would very heavily recommend it. It's really cool. She was also a comedian, which is really fun. She appeared in several comedy showcases and group shows. She made her festival debut as a solo act at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival in 2014, and she won the award for Best Newcomer at the festival too, which I think is
Nice.
really cool for your first time. She died unexpectedly in Melbourne on December 6th of 2014. And then in 2017, she was inducted posthumously into the Victorian Honor Roll of Women in recognition of her work as a journalist, comedian, feminist, and fierce disability activist. And then in 2023, so just last year, a bronze statue of her in her wheelchair was sculpted by Danny Fraser, and was unveiled in her hometown of Stallwell in Caddo Park. And this is really neat. Somewhere, I think around the base or just somewhere on the statue, there's a motion activated audio that provides a description of the statue to provide like greater accessibility. And then there was also a website, stellayoung.com.au, was also created as a part of the Remembering Stella Young project. So huge impact.
Say, can you repeat what you had said about the statue?
Yeah, about the audio.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's motion activated audio. So for folks who might be blind or visually impaired, if the sensor realizes that there's motion, it will play the audios, and it's a description of the statue.
Love that.
Cool.
For like greater accessibility, which I thought was like you just never hear about that existing
Ever.
anywhere. I was like,
That's what it's like.
the first I've heard of it.
Can you please repeat that?
Yeah, so just to be such like an incredible like activist and like such an advocate, that something that is relatively unheard of to
Yeah.
be done, just knowing like that is what you would want, I think is really cool.
I wish I was doing impactful things like that at 14 years old.
I know. I was
on Webkins, baby. No, wait, that's probably younger than that.
Right.
Fun penguin.
Oh,
Yeah.
penguin. Yeah.
No, I saw that. And it's just like a single line just mentioning it. I'm like, I would like to read more about that, please. That's just so incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And her, I will say, I would heavily recommend checking out her website, thestellayoung.com.au, because it does go more in depth on like her life and her work, and like especially like her like younger life growing up. It's really interesting.
Well, I was gonna say thank you because I feel like so often we have history from the US,
Yeah.
which mine is taking it back to the US, but that's why I was
Mine
gonna
is
say thank you. Thank you for talking about that. Well, I can jump into mine. So like I said, it happened in the US, United States. So on March 12th of 1990 occurred the Capitol crawl. That's what it's known of, or known by. So around this time, Americans with Disability Act, ADA, was being filed in the beginning stages of it, basically, at Congress. And around this time, there was like a lot of protests, a lot of demonstrations and things like that in DC. So on March 12th, I have my notes right here, over 1,000 protesters marched from the White House to the US Capitol. And I put that in Google Maps. I don't know what route they took, you know what I'm saying? But based on Google Maps, it's like a little over 2 miles. And if you're walking, which they did, and not only just walking, people had mobility aids, wheelchairs, walkers, things of that sort. But if walking, it was nearly an hour. So I just kind of wanted to put that into perspective. But once people got to the Capitol, as like a physical demonstration, people who use mobility aids, again, wheelchairs, whether it's like mobilized wheelchairs,
Yeah, like
or
power chairs.
yes, or just the other ones that you kind of just turn the wheels, walkers, things, canes, anything of that sort. People left them and crawled up the steps of the Capitol, which was 83 steps, just to show like the inaccessibility of the architecture of it. And so that's kind of what it was talking about, like just showing how that type of architecture impacts people with disabilities. And then also highlighting the urgency behind the need to pass the ADA. And one of the biggest parts about this event that was highlighted was that the youngest person to crawl was 8 years old. Her name was Jennifer Keelan Chaffins, who had cerebral palsy. And she was actually, she might have been 8 years old at the time, but she actually started protesting 2 years before that. So she was like 6 when she kind of got introduced to that advocacy world. But there's a video when this was going on, a lot of video was being taken, and someone did catch her her crawling up the steps, and she said, "I'll take all night if I have to." And it was like, wow, like she's the youngest person there. And I, like I said, she kind of started protesting when she was 6, but the year before this, when she was 7, in Montreal, her and her mom were actually arrested during protesting a conference. She was 7 at the time, which I'm like, y'all arrested a 7-year-old, but part of it is that when they were arrested, the police had to call for accessible school buses because their vehicles were not accessible. So they were like, ironically, they couldn't even take us in the so-called paddy wagons. They had to get school buses. So yeah, I don't remember how I got introduced to that.
I feel like I've heard about it before, but never quite so in depth.
Yeah, no, and I feel like I learned about it. I don't know if it was like through social work, like social work policy, or if it was through one of the books, but I remember like actually watching the videos of everything maybe in the last 2 years. And I was like, man, and seeing Jennifer literally being like, I'm gonna take all night if I have to. I was like, man, shout out to you. But yes, that is all I have. That's all I have. Um, and then I was gonna say 4 months after that is when the ADA was signed into law.
What's wild though is even with the ADA, the Capitol building is still remarkably inaccessible.
Yes, and I do want to add to that, but it's like bringing it back more to Texas with my pastoral. I spent a lot of time there, and I remember actually this is prior to my pastoral. It was my undergrad program at for my dang, what am I trying to say? For my bachelor's of social work. We went to Advocacy Day, we went to Texas Capitol, and Advocacy Day, we meet on the south steps of the Capitol. And so that's where everyone's at. That year, that was my first time ever at the Capitol. It was 2020, right before everything shut down. Someone in a power wheelchair got up and got on the mic, which is what people gather on the steps for. It's literally you're just advocating for whatever yeah, you're sharing. And she was saying, I had to go all the way around to the other side because that was the only ramp.
Yeah.
And it's so wild because that person I met in 2020 or saw them in 2020 actually ended up being my coworker 2022. And I was talking to her about it and I was like, I remember this happening at the Capitol. She was like, that was me. But and then not even just that, that was like that day I did not go inside the Capitol, but in my pastoral, there are so many stairs. There are elevators, yes, but to a certain point, you cannot go see some representatives without going up some stairs. And I just remember thinking about that all the time when it came to advocacy, policy advocacy, that people with disabilities, like limited mobility, literally cannot go see their representative if their representative is in that specific. Let me not get on my soapbox, but I just remember that was like such a big thing in our advocacy. But yeah, that's Texas. Those buildings are very, very old. I get it.
Which, because that makes me think about our courthouse here.
Yeah.
Do we have an elevator in
We
our
do
courthouse?
have
Okay.
we do have an elevator, but I mean it'll take you to the floors, but to get to the rooms, there are steps like
Yeah.
for some of them. And so
It's really it's so much stuff that you don't think to look for until you know to look for it.
yes, no, true.
Just
And
dear listeners, dear viewers at home, we encourage you to like take this and be thinking about these things like as you're going through just like day-to-day life, like where are their steps? Are there options? Like,
Right.
is there a ramp? Is there not? And just be, try to be conscious of that.
And really advocate it even for, you do not have to have a disability. Accessibility is for everyone. Like truly, we always talk about that here at our office. How like ramps, yes, it can help people who have wheelchairs or canes or anything of that sort, but it can also help people who are carrying a wagon, people who may be pushing a stroller and things of that sort. But no, you're right.
Cart of groceries.
Cart of groceries, like apartment complexes that like you have to go up 4 flights of stairs to put your groceries in your home and things of that sort. That's a whole
Or
different.
move in.
Or like, okay, personal story. I've told y'all this before, but my friend in DC lived on the 16th floor, and we get there and the elevator is broken.
Oh god.
And we had to like meet people at her apartment. And so I had to go upstairs with my 50-pound luggage and my backpack,
So
all these things. Yes, I tapped out. I took a break at 10, but I was like, how is this legal? Like, why is this not urgent? Like 16 flights of stairs or E plus more, whatever. But anyways,
That reminds me of the Big Bang Theory. I don't actually know what floor they were on, but I just realized that their elevator was always broken.
see, and that's like, and people are like, oh, I'll just take the stairs. But I'm like, that's
who can't
not
take the
who,
stairs.
yeah, right. And so, okay, let me stop because I'm getting heated.
That's all right. I was like, but we still have Elsie.
We
has
still
to
have
share too.
Elsie.
Okay, so my person is Josh Sundquist. He is an activist, motivational speaker, also a comedian, executive producer of a show based on one of his books, and an author. So when he was 9, he was diagnosed with, I didn't write down the type of cancer. It just says a rare type of cancer on here, but it says it somewhere, but now I can't remember. But he was diagnosed with some form of cancer, and he did a year on chemotherapy before they amputated his left leg at the hip. And so after that, he did part of his physical therapy was also a program that the hospital had, which was like an adaptive sports program, so that he was able to learn how to play sports with one less leg, um, which I think is cool. And with that, he went to the Paralympics in 2006 for skiing in Italy, which I also think is really cool. And then so for his books though, that was like my main thing. I mean, he does do like a lot of activist work through his motivational speaking and even in his comedy, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But for his books, so he has Just Don't Fall, which is like, is it called a subtitle? Like, okay, so it's like subtitled A Hilariously True Story of Childhood Cancer, Amputation, Romantic Yearning, Truth, and Olympic Greatness. And so that one just talks about his life growing up and like how he went from being able-bodied to disabled and like how that affected his social life and him and sports life and all of those things. And then he has another one called We Should Hang Out Sometime, which this one's more of like a comedy situation, but he realized at 25 that he had never had a girlfriend. And so he went back to all of the girls that had rejected him in middle school and asked them what went wrong
Yeah.
and wrote a book about it.
That's funny.
So I just think it's
I want to
funny.
read it.
Yeah.
I think it's funny to like be like, here's all my greatest failures, or like greatest failures, but like,
Here's a book of failures.
yeah, pretty much. I hope you enjoy. You can purchase it for this amount. Like, I don't know, that just cracks me up. And then this one is called Love and First Sight, which is about this kid. It's a fictional story. It's a young adult novel. And it's about this 16-year-old kid who's blind. And he does like a whole bunch of embarrassing stuff on his first day of school. And then he starts to have a crush on this girl, Cecily. And then there's like some surgery that now he can see again. And it turns out that like all of his friends had been lying to him about what Cecily looked like. And so it's like a huge thing of like he doesn't really care that Cecily doesn't fit like traditional beauty, but like all of his friends lied to him about it. So it's like kind of like an odd betrayal. So it's learning about how to deal with traditional beauty standards and like being okay with breaking those norms. And then the last one is Semi-Famous, which is just about his story of like fame and mental health. But going back to the comedian and the executive producer, they made a show out of Just Don't Fall. It's on Apple TV. But
Rats,
for
I don't have it.
for the motivational speaker and comedian part, like he uses a lot of humor when he talks about disability justice. And I honestly like, granted, that just might be what he feels comfortable doing, but I feel like a part of it would just be like to make other people more okay with hearing the things that he's trying to say. But he does that a lot with his Halloween costumes, which you should go look those up because they're really fun.
When I was looking at them earlier, I did not know he was an amputee.
Yeah.
So I was, and then she told me, I was like, oh, the fidget spinner makes sense.
You're like, I get it.
I was like, oh, because I just thought it was funny that he was a fidget spinner. But then I found out he's an amputee. I was like, oh, it makes
That's why the flamingo
sense.
works so
I
well.
love
The
the
flamingo,
Yeah.
the foosball. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, it's clicking.
But where now he got married in 2015, has a kid, works as a child ambassador for Children's Miracle Network hospitals, which I'm pretty sure is the same hospital that like he was at, along with his 18 million other jobs. He also does that. So
Wow, that is cool.
yeah.
He's a neat guy. I think I was in high school-ish, like early high school, maybe the first time I saw one of his Halloween costumes.
Today's my first day.
They're fun.
That fidget
Now
spinner
you know-
had me
now you know to
laughing.
look for 'em.
They're so funny.
He's just a funny guy.
And I like had an opportunity to listen to him speak, and he is very good.
That's right.
Yeah. He's
You were in
really good.
college, high school, or
Middle
what?
school.
Middle school.
Middle school, high school.
All right.
Yeah.
And that was through school, right?
It was through horses.
Oh. The horse was the one talking and introduced her. No, I'm just kidding. That was a lame joke. Okay.
Oh.
Wait, what do you always say?
Bad joke, bad joke.
Yeah.
Crickets.
But I guess any final thoughts before we move on to
Mm-mm.
learning about people? Well, I actually have a recommendation goal for today, which is we just want to encourage you and to continue encouraging ourselves to work to actively research and learn more about folks with disabilities throughout history. I think that there is I don't necessarily feel like misconception is the right word, but I'm going to use it anyways, a misconception of like disability being a new thing or like a newer phenomenon.
That's real, yes.
Especially just how like folks throughout history with disabilities have kind of been rewritten to not be perceived as disabled or maybe have their disabilities entirely not acknowledged. So taking the time, and as more research is done and more works are coming out, I feel like it's easier now to be able to learn, because I think you've mentioned like Harriet Tubman.
Harriet
before. I
Tubman.
feel like that's one like
I
had
didn't
no idea.
Yes, I didn't. I was reading a book and it got to a chapter where what they were talking about in relation to disability, and I remember them talking about Harriet Tubman developed epilepsy because her slave owner had hit, if I remember correctly, they hit her on the head, but it was with a brick.
Oh.
Yes, and so like when she was helping enslaved people through the Underground Railroad, like she would fall asleep. And then I feel like during our discussion about in care work, they were talking about how like she would talk to herself a lot too and things like that. But even in care work, they were talking about how they didn't hone in on that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess like some people may not want to hone in, but I think it's like still part of their story.
And it just also shows what an important role folks with disabilities have played throughout all of history. Because too frequently it is like too often I think people look at folks with with disabilities just as like someone to be pitied,
Yes.
rather than acknowledging that they are entirely a person who is capable of making incredible contributions to history and to society.
Because what forgetting his name, Teddy Roosevelt, the president. Hello.
Theodore
Those
Roosevelt.
are yes, Theodore Roosevelt. He used a wheelchair
Mm,
and a lot of
FDR.
FDR.
I was like, not Teddy.
I was like,
wrong.
Yeah, Franklin
Boo.
Roosevelt.
Roosevelt.
Ooh, bad history.
Bad history. I told you I suck at history. But I remember
Is it polio?
yeah, and I remember there was a picture of him that they would always post of him outdoors, but they like almost cropped out
His chair.
his chair. But also like Frida Kahlo, a lot of people talk about her, but she was in a really bad accident and she was, but a lot of her painting was in bed. And I remember her like painting her casts and things like that. But yeah,
So that's our recommendation. That's not our recommendation. Our recommendation is coming from Mónica.
me. So my recommendation is really engaging with like disabled content creators. I have some of my favorites. So I think this is their name both on TikTok and Instagram, but it's crutches underscore and underscore spice or spices. I don't know if it's spice or spices. Their name is Imani, and they talk about their own experience, but they're really informative about like current events and again talking about like history, like kind of also bringing that out from history, but also like current events in relation to disability because everything I always say this probably on a daily basis, everything is connected. Um, also, I'm laughing because I didn't know if their name was how to pronounce their name, the next one. But also on Instagram, candy.corn, COURN. But they have autism, but their house is beautiful. It's almost like all pink,
Oh, that's
which
fun.
that's my favorite color. But they talk about like different stuff like home decor, you know, what people say like dopamine decor.
Yeah.
Like they do like this is where you get stuff. They post about games, but they also talk about like them having autism and things like that. Another person that I really like, and actually I love well, I love ASL, American Sign Language. I've been learning it on for probably since college. Um, and his name is Niall DeMarco. He's a deaf model. He was on America's Next Top Model. He's very handsome. But he now has a memoir. He went to Gallaudet University, but that's in like the DMV, like DC area, which is like an all deaf university.
Oh, cool.
And if I'm not mistaken, where that university is, there's like it's like its own little community of like this like there's a lot of deaf people who like work that like are owners of the stores and they might the main language that they speak is ASL there and things like that. A deaf neighborhood, if you will. But I don't think he's a twin, but he has a brother who is also deaf, who is a DJ.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so like I don't even know how many generations in their family that have been deaf, but he really introduced me into like deaf culture, deaf community, ASL, things of that sort. Really, really young, but yep, that because I used to love America's Next Top Model. But yeah, so engaging with content creators, and people who are not content creators, just disabled people in general, but just listening to them, their experiences about their disability, but also just them living life as a person with disability, just normal, you know what I'm saying? But yeah,
Just as a person.
as a person.
Awesome. Well, that's all from us for this week and actually for the whole year. This is it for 2024.
Wow.
Goodbye 2024. But don't worry, we'll be back once again in 2025 with a whole nother season of Real-ationship Goals. Don't worry. But in the meantime, over the course of the long break, if you're missing us and you want a little bit more prevention content, follow us on Instagram at ACCVC_prevention. Or if you just want to keep up with the Advocacy Center, you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Advocacy Waco. But in the meantime, we'll see you next year.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for tuning in to Real-ationship Goals. This episode was produced by the Prevention and Education Department of the Advocacy Center for Crime Victims and Children in Waco, Texas. Interested in more content from PNE or the Advocacy Center? You can follow us on Instagram at ACCVC_prevention or on Instagram and Facebook at Advocacy Waco. Be sure to like this episode and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. Bye.